SunTrust Bank, and I was asked to facilitate this group. So my role here today is to keep us on point, keep us on time, and on our agenda. That is, if you will let me. All right. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with it, and those of you that are familiar with, Operation Hope has been increasing the attention around the subjects of all of these working groups that we've had for 3 years. And they're looking to get some real work done. They're looking for some great minds to think and come up with some ideas today. And they're looking towards implementing some of those great ideas that will come from our session today. We've designed a process for the 2 hours that we're going to be together. When I finish my session, then I will allow the panel, the experts that are seated here before you, 20 minutes to give some speaking points about the subject that we're going to talk about today. They're going to throw a question out to you, and then we'll allow you 30 minutes at your table groups to do some brainstorming and thinking about the question that they posed to you. Once that session, that 30-minute session has started, they will probably mix and mingle around the table to start some conversation, to make sure that we're really thinking and going in depth on the subjects that they have asked us to talk about. At the end of that 30 minutes, I will pull you back together and tell you what to do then. I'm not going to overload you with instructions on how the process is going, but I will keep you on track. Is that all right? Very good. Now, at each table, we should have a session leader. So, let me see the hands of all the session leaders at each table. A hand should go up from each table. There should only be one at each table. Okay, is there a session leader at the back table in the corner? There's no session leader there. All right, is there a session leader here? Is there one here? Well, we just might have to ask for volunteers. What do you think? Or are the session leaders appointed? That's the first question. They were appointed. All right. Well, if you're at a table where there is not a session leader, appoint someone. How about that? Yeah. Until that person arrives.
I wish I had my sunglasses.
All right. I was actually standing in light, and this light is in my eyes. But all right. All right. So session leaders. Also at each table, there should be a scribe. So all scribes, raise your hand. There should be a scribe at each table. All right. If there's not a scribe at your table right now, appoint someone to take notes, because we want the ideas and the discussion that you all are having at your table groups to be captured. Okay? Now, can we work with that? Because we want to take away as much information from your table groups as possible today. And we need those 2 leaders in your table groups. Is that all right? Will you work with me on that? And Operation Hope. Great. Our tech person is in the back. His name is Trey. Raise your hand, Trey. And if we're having any technical challenges at your table or in the room, Trey is the one that will help us with those challenges. Let's see what else is now. Now, in order for this session to be as productive as possible, we have experts that's going to lead the discussion on worldwide youth unemployment. And along with the information from the experts, we're also going to capitalize on the expertise and the experience that you all bring as a table. So the dialogue will go back and forth as we move throughout our time together. I will keep the process moving forward. Now I'm going to introduce our panel. And as I introduce the panel members, would you please stand so everyone will know who you are. The first panel member is Ambassador Dr. Renee Sanders. She is the CEO of FEEEDS Advocacy Initiative, and she is the U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria, ECOWAS, and the Republic of Congo. Our next expert, and I'll just go down my list, is Carol Guthrie. And Carol is the head of the Washington office for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Our third expert is Cas Coovadia, and he is the Managing Director of Banking Association of South Africa, and he is also the chairman of the Hope Organization in South Africa. Then we have Amr Banaja. He is the Vice President of Marketing, Communication, and Social Responsibility for the SEDCO Holdings. And we also have Sean Brazier. Sorry about that, Sean. He is the U.S. Program Manager for McKinsey Social Initiative. And now I'm going to turn it over to our panel for 20 minutes, and then we'll convene, and I'll tell you how we'll move forward.
I guess I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, there you go. My area is Africa, and I just need to do a little bit of a bio correction. My last posting was U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria and Congo, and I'm not currently the sitting ambassador there, so I just want to make sure I say that. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about in terms of youth unemployment is really to give you some factoids that I think puts Africa in the context of why you have global unemployment. Africa right now is the third largest populated continent in the world. It is on trajectory to become the largest populated country in the world, with more than half of that population being people between the ages of 14 years and 25 years. The median age for those in sub-Saharan Africa is between 15 years old and 19 years old. And so that huge demographic is a real strategic issue for us as a global community. What that means in terms of unemployment, however, is right now you have 200 million young people on the continent who do not have two things: employment or the prospects for employment. You have 74 million wage-earning people entering the job market each year on top of that 200 million figure that I gave you. So what does that mean for the future? What does that mean for the continent? Is that something that's a positive, a liability for the continent, or is that a challenge that can be overcome, or is it an asset? But what are the drivers of unemployment, particularly on the African continent? And I'm particularly talking about sub-Saharan Africa. The drivers are, of course, poverty. And what are the sub-elements of poverty? Think about what the sub-elements of poverty are. Put that on your list. But on my list, you would have famine, in addition to conflict, in addition to regional differences, in addition to religious differences. Climate change is a big factor. The migrant issue, which you're hearing about all the time now on the news, that's another factor. And then it's opportunity and access. Those are some of the sub-elements of poverty that drive unemployment on the African continent. One of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that the population of sub-Saharan Africa in 2050 will be 2.4 billion people. And as I already said, more than half of that population will be people between the ages of 14 and 25 years old. That is your prime wage earning years. And so if they don't have training and they don't have opportunity, then what does that mean going forward? You see a lot of trends now on the African continent, particularly in what I call the Sahel extremism region, running from Tunisia all the way over to Mombasa in Kenya. But a lot of this is related to the sub-elements that I've just described. If you don't have opportunity, for employment, education, access to the financial access to the financial system, then these conflicts that you keep hearing about are going to continue to happen. But the question at hand is, do you see this global youth bulge? In fact, in Africa, it's called the Africa Youth Bulge. That's just how large that is. Right now, you have more females in that category than you have males. And so that's another factor. We have at-risk girls and at-risk women. Because just as those demographics are very, very stark for the male young population, they are twice as stark for the female population. So I will leave my remarks there, my opening remarks there, and turn it over to my colleague, my next colleague on the panel.
Sure.
Let me mention this to you. Because of time, each speaker will have 4 minutes, okay?
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd also like to make a small correction. This time it's to my name, though. It's not Arm. Okay, it's Amr. So I know it's difficult to pronounce, but it was interesting for me to hear, both Chelsea as well as John mention Saudi Arabia, and they mentioned it about 3 or 4 times. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I represent a group that is a diversified investment group that's based in Saudi. And somebody asked me today, they said, do you really have an unemployment issue amongst the youth in Saudi Arabia? And the reality is, I'm going to talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia, its impact on the Arab and the Muslim world as a whole, because it is the center of that world, or at least people perceive it to be. First of all, we have a population that is 60% under the age of 25, and historically, the government used to be the largest employer. It used to employ 2/3 of all the employed people in Saudi Arabia. And all of these youth that are coming into the workforce, whether it's male or female, now have to adapt to a new reality that the government is no longer going to provide these jobs, specifically because the oil price is the largest source of income. And now we're going to have to look at diversification and new ways of bringing in income to the country. And this is the same thing that is happening in Saudi Arabia, as well as the other oil-rich Gulf countries, if you will. But if you look at the other Arab countries as well, as you know, we had big issues with the Arab Spring, and these are countries that do not have oil, and they've had tremendous issues with uprising and upspring, and basically, I think that's a problem of, again, employment amongst the youth, and the GDP per capita in these countries range from 1,000 to 3,000 per capita. But if you look at also Saudi Arabia as being the center of the Muslim world, I'd like to also throw out some numbers on the Islamic world, because I think there's a lot of negativity when it comes to the Muslim world. We have 1.73 billion Muslims around the world, and that's 23% of the global population, but they only contribute to 2% of the global GDP. And that's an alarming figure. I mean, people talk about the size of the Muslim population, but they never say how much they actually contribute. And it's very low. And how do we include these countries rather than exclude them, or actually look at them in a negative way? And it's sometimes painful when you hear, for example, presidential candidates saying things like, let's keep the Muslims out of our country, rather than trying to include them in the country, because all that does is basically, instill a lot of hate and hatred to, from one country to another or to another. And it's not a country. It's a 1.74 billion Muslims around the world. So my question back is how do we breed a sense of tolerance amongst, the youth, amongst, all sorts of, all kinds of religions, and that's really my question today.
Okay, during the dark days of apartheid in South Africa, I was interrogated several times, and those lights make me feel I'm being interrogated again. But so I'm kind of at home here at the moment. So you obviously can't see me. I don't know whether you can, but I can't see you, so please forgive me. The ambassador, to a certain extent, stole my thunder from a data point of view. But let me just say, in addition to the data she introduced, in my country, in South Africa, youth unemployment is just over 50%. Now, that's in the most diversified economy on the continent. Okay, and so you can only imagine what it's like elsewhere on the continent. Let me also then move away from the data, since the ambassador has put that on the table, to say, I believe that while population growth and unemployment need to be looked at together, I believe that it's not the only factor that's on the table. I don't think that there's a substantively direct link between population growth and unemployment. I think there are other issues that's exacerbating the situation, certainly on the continent. I think some of these are structural issues in many of our countries. So again, if I speak for South Africa, the environment to develop entrepreneurial activity, to start small businesses, is one that's an extremely difficult one. It takes a long time to start a small business. I don't think the regulatory environment is very conducive to that. And so young people who want to go into small businesses find it difficult to do that. And I think that's a problem that we need to address. The other issue is skills, and not just skills, but skills to enable people to get jobs in an economy that we heard this morning is getting into the third wave of technology. Okay? So it's not just skills, it's what sort of skills we provide and to ensure that those skills actually enable people to get jobs, particularly young people. Then education at the basic level and up to just pre-university or pre-college is an issue. And here there are a number of issues, certainly on the continent. Teaching is an issue, our teaching methodology, the quality of our teachers, the infrastructure at schools. 25% of African youth are still illiterate today, which is an amazing statistic in one of the fastest growing populations in the world. So there are a whole range of structural issues that need to be dealt with. Then I think that, and this is a question I'd like to leave to the table, I think there is some introspection for business in this environment. I don't think the lead in addressing youth unemployment is going to come from government or anybody else. I think that business needs to take a longer-term view towards business sustainability and needs to begin to understand that the skilling of youth, the appropriate skilling of young people and training them and putting into place apprenticeship programs and so on is vital for the long-term sustainability of businesses. And I think that again, this morning we heard about the inclusive economy. Now, inclusive economy has become a bit of a mantra. We need to understand what we mean by that. We need to understand what the role of business is in promoting inclusive economy. There's a whole lot of stuff for government to do. But I think that if business doesn't take the lead, and business doesn't begin to see the imperative of addressing the youth unemployment issue, then in the long term, business is not doing business, because that youth unemployment issue begins to manifest itself in a way that's inimical to business operating in a sustainable way. And let me just conclude with, in South Africa, one of the manifestations of this has been the fees must fall issue, where students last year mobilized for free university education. Now, I was quite involved in that. I sat on the council of one of the biggest universities in South Africa, and I saw what this did. Now, I think that the Fees Must Fall campaign in many ways was positive in the sense that it brought to the fore the underlying issues that cause unemployment, youth unemployment, the underlying issues that make it impossible for many young people to attend university because of lack of affordability and so on. But at the same time, it also demonstrated a dearth of leadership in the youth movement, in the student movement, where the student movement is unable to come to the fore to deal with the consequences of no fees, for instance, all right? And in the South African context, the student movement hasn't been able to actually come to the fore to say, what does it mean to protest and to mobilize within a democratic situation as against apartheid in the past, all right? Which we mobilized against, and we haven't actually crossed that bridge to see what we do. So I think that there are a number of manifestations of the youth unemployment issue, and I think that if we don't tackle it, I think the manifestations are going to become more severe, and I think there is a critical role for business. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I want to start by saying welcome. So I'm from Atlanta, and so I walked here. I live a mile away and work a mile away. So welcome. I think I'm in a great spot because what I do at the McKinsey Social Initiative as the U.S. program manager, we're working to address some of these challenges laid out already. So as a bit of context, the McKinsey Social Initiative is a separate nonprofit organization founded by McKinsey and Company, the consulting firm. And the idea was, how do we roll up our sleeves and tackle some of the social and economic issues facing our clients in the public, social, and private sector around the world? So this McKinsey Social Initiative, and our first effort called the Generation Project, is designed to tackle youth unemployment around the world for 18 to 29-year-olds who are unemployed or underemployed. So there's 75 million young people unemployed. 3 times that number around the world are underemployed. So how do we roll up our sleeves and actually develop solutions that can address this problem? So we've been around for 14 months. We are in the US, Kenya, India, Mexico, and Spain. We've graduated over 1,200 students. And here in the US alone, we're going to be in 7 cities this quarter, including a start here in Atlanta, February 29th. So quick plug for Atlanta. But the way we do this is that we're trying to solve or prove 3 things. 1, we're trying to show and work with young people to change their lives through meaningful employment and getting their first step onto a career ladder. 2, we're working with employers, as Cas mentioned, who are vital to this piece. We're working with employers to prove the value and the returns that will come from investing and hiring young people going through programs like ours. And the 3rd thing we're trying to do is build something that works at scale. As I mentioned, we're in 5 countries around the world. Our aspiration is to train and place 1 million young people by 2020. And it's a big goal, but as clearly we laid out, there's a lot of opportunity for us to get involved. Now to do this, we're trying to create an innovative approach to training young people. So that means we're not only trying to train and equip them with the technical skills to do the job while they're on the field or on the work floor, we're also equipping them with the behavioral skills like professionalism and adaptability that's going to allow them to quickly change and adapt to the circumstances in a changing environment. And we're also working on the mindset skills so that when the life challenges do come up that so often do derail young people from pursuing their goals, they have the skills and they have the support system available to help them overcome those challenges. Now we try to deliver this in an engaging manner in a platform that keeps people enthusiastic and excited to come to the training program, because so often the training programs that are in existence right now are very rote and you just learn the skills without actually applying them. And it's not in an engaging environment, so people lose interest. And so we're trying to figure out a way that we can ignite excitement in young people's career pathways and also in their thought processes. The second piece, as laid out here, it's not just an educational problem, it's not just a student problem, and it's not just an employment problem. And so we're trying to bring the students and the young people who are looking for opportunities to the table. We're trying to bring the educational providers to the table and the employers who can provide input into the curriculum, but also they're the ones who are hiring, and so they're a vital piece. And then last and certainly not least, we bring the public and social sectors together and those organizations who are helping these young people overcome the challenges that so often derail them from their path. So the question that I'd like to pose today, though, and it's what we experience all around the world in the 5 different countries we're in, is this a problem it's because of a lack of skills in the young people, or is it a lack of will, or are there some other challenges in the environment, like transportation challenges, childcare challenges, home life challenges that impact a young person's ability to hold down a job? And from our perspective, what we're trying to do is figure out these problems and figure out solutions that cut across all cultures, all geographies, and even all occupations, so that we can figure out what actually works to tackle these challenges. But I'm looking forward to the conversation today, and it's one thing that's very close to our hearts, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, Sean could not possibly have given me a better intro to what I have to say today. I'm Carol Guthrie, and I'm the head of the Washington office for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And just a little primer on the OECD. We're one of those organizations that was founded as part of the Marshall Plan after World War II to get all of the countries that had been at war with one another to start cooperating economically so that there would be less chance of war and more chance of sustainable global growth. We are an intergovernmental organization with 34 advanced economy members, but all of the research that we do on economics and development is meant to benefit all countries across the world. And so no matter what data you're looking for, whether it's on youth unemployment, on education, on local governance, or on inclusive growth, we probably work on that at the OECD. And the reason I'm here today is because we do in-depth work on youth unemployment, and in particular, we had a paper about youth unemployment comparing youth unemployment in advanced economies and in emerging economies. And the title of that paper was called Same, Same, But Different. And so what we did at the OECD was take a look at what youth unemployment is like in advanced economies and in emerging economies, where the causes are the same, where the challenges are the same, and where those might be different. And so with the limited time that I have, I'm going to talk to you about the challenges, and it's going to be super depressing because that's my role as the data person. And then when we come back, we'll talk about happier things and potential policy solutions, which is also what the OECD does. What we found when we looked at advanced and emerging economies and youth unemployment is that all countries, regardless of their level of development, are interested in reducing youth unemployment for two particular reasons. Number one, because lower youth unemployment contributes to economic growth, which is a goal of all countries, but also because, as Amr talked about so eloquently, lowering youth unemployment is also a very important component of social cohesion and a very important bulwark against social unrest. And so that's something that advanced and emerging economies have in common. But it starts to, and the other thing that both advanced and emerging economies have in common is that tackling youth unemployment is important not only for youth today, but it's super important down the road. The ambassador talked about the idea that your first working years are among some of the most important that you have. And one of the things that the OECD data has found is something called scarring, and that is that if you are unemployed or underemployed in your first few years of working life, you are liable to have negative effects on your employment, on your salary, on your benefits, on your skills 20 years down the road. So this isn't an issue where you can just sort of kick the can down the road. From there, though, the differences start to diverge. In advanced economies, youth unemployment took a huge spike right after the financial crisis. In emerging economies, it's often due to population growth. And so one of the challenges that emerging economies face, developing economies face, is that there are many, many more youth to employ. Another difference that one finds is in many advanced economies, education is compulsory later. And so in emerging economies, you tend to have students who are leaving school as many as 3 to 4 years earlier, which means they aren't getting the same skill sets. And there, where in advanced economies, people tend to prioritize getting all the way through high school at least. In emerging economies, one of the things that needs to be tackled is access to junior high. Most places have a lot of primary school, but in places like India, for instance, you may have to travel a long way to even go to junior high, or junior high may not be taught in your local dialect because that school is in another city. So that's a real issue. And I'll close, there's a lot more, but I'll close by talking about something that we've discovered that is sort of the most important thing to look at when you look at youth unemployment, and we call those NEETs. Neither in employment, education, or training, because that's where the bulk of the most severe youth unemployment lies, is young people 15 to 24 and sometimes 15 to 29 or 30 who aren't in employment, they're not in education, and they're not in training. If you speak Spanish, they have a much better name for it. It's called NINIs, ni estudia, ni trabaja, but for the OECD, NEETs. And those numbers are really staggering. In South Africa, the OECD's numbers on that, at age 19, 40% of the youth are neither in employment, education, or training, 50% at 22. In India, 30% at age 29. In India, Indonesia, Turkey, 30% of the youth are neither in employment, education, or training. That's where the social unrest comes from. That's where long-term scarring comes from. That's where we want to look at policy solutions, because that is the toughest nut to crack and the thing with the most long-term consequences. And the question I would leave you with, what if this sounds familiar where you work on youth unemployment? When you look at youth unemployment, whether you're looking at it in the United States or in another country, which of these problems resonates with you? Because at the OECD, we always say if you identify the problem, then you're able to move on to the policy solutions.
All right, thank you. Now, you've heard some very interesting and heartbreaking facts about youth unemployment that's going on around the world, and our panelists have also posed some really thought-provoking questions to you. So determine which question your work group, your table group is going to tackle, or maybe you want to tackle each one of them for a few minutes. But at this time, you'll be given 30 minutes to answer the questions that were probed out here. And if you want some of the panel members to come around and sit and talk with you and just, you know, fill you in on some more information to help you come up with ideas, then let's make it happen.
So my question was basically, after I gave the facts, was how do we promote tolerance? I mean, first of all, before we even talk about youth unemployment, if there's no tolerance between different religions, then really we're not going to solve the problem. So what can we do in terms of tolerance?
Okay, my issue was the role of business. I think that business needs to take the lead in different ways in ensuring that young people are skilled to participate in today's economy. And that's not because business are good guys. They are, but that's not the reason. It's for the long-term sustainability of business itself. And just to discuss that.
My question was to take a look of all the different difficulties and challenges that all the panelists listed as contributing to youth unemployment. If you're working to fight youth unemployment, what if that sounds familiar to you? What if that resonates most with you? Because if you identify the particular problem where you live or where you work, then we can look at better policy solutions.
And mine was whether or not you see the young population as an asset or a liability to the global framework. And I also noted that there were a couple other sub-themes that were drivers of unemployment. I intentionally left off 3, hoping that you would come up with either those 3 or some others.
And mine was, what's holding young people back? Is it a lack of skills, a lack of opportunity, a lack of will? Or are there external factors like transportation issues at play?
Okay, I think that helps us a lot, don't you? Okay, let's bring us back center. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk some more. And we have heard some great discussion going on in your table group. I mean, this is really a lot of brain power going on in here. So for the next few minutes, our panelists, if you notice, have been, mixing, mingling with you all, and some have pulled up and engaged in some of your conversation. So they're going to share with you some comments that has resonated with them when they were spending time with you, and if they have any additional comments that they want to, express or questions that they want to ask, I'm going to give them about 20 minutes to do so, and then we'll get back in a 30-minute group session, and I'll tell you what you'll do then. So we have about 3 or 4 minutes for you to share what you experienced in the larger group, in the order that you choose to go in. You want to start on that end?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much to several of you for letting me sit in on your discussions. I think between all the different tables I was able to visit, you were answering all of the different questions that were posed by the panelists, so that was pretty wonderful. Some of the things that resonated the most with me, one of the tables, I think back here with my fellow depressing economist from the OECD, was talking about the idea of our youth an asset or a liability. And they were talking about the creativity of youth, they were talking about the energy and the drive of youth, and what really became clear was that youth, taken as a whole, are absolutely an asset. I think societies decide whether or not youth are going to be a liability. And that is, are we investing in that human capital? Are we responding to that human capital? Are we looking to develop that human capital? For those of you who go to church, it's kind of like the parable of the talents, right? It's the idea of what do we do with that asset that we have been given? Do we develop that asset? Do we use it? Or do we let it lie dormant? And do we reap consequences when we let that asset lie dormant because it can become a liability? Another table right here talked about diversity of education. And this is something that the OECD has really found in our work, that it is, more and more people need college educations, and we know that. But not everybody is going to go to college. And so if you only focus on pre-college educations, you're not serving your entire youth population. We need to look at vocational schools. We need to look at dual track schools. We need to look at making sure that apprenticeships are available to people. That's a really important part of making certain that we serve the entire youth population and we don't leave behind a whole segment that may not want to go to college or have other reasons for not being on that track. We also talked at this table a little bit about students who do go to college and they find that they're overskilled for the job market. This is not just a problem of people with not enough education. You often, in this OECD found this to be true in emerging economies, that you'll have people who do get that college education who do go to all that trouble and all that drive and all that expense. And then they find themselves sort of out on the top end because they're in really competitive markets, and so we need to not forget about those folks. And then the last thing I heard was just a reminder that, you know, we talk about the problem of youth unemployment, but these people are individuals. They're individual human beings with home lives and challenges and skills and opportunities. And so while it's, you know, nice for me to sit up here and crunch numbers and talk about those big numbers, that ultimately it's going to be solved by people like a number of you in the room who are caring about individuals and looking to solve problems, and not only structurally, but also on the ground with students one by one.
I had two really interesting conversations, but they were both about the same thing. So my question that I posed was around, you know, what's holding youth back or young adults back? Is it skill, is it will, or there's external challenges? I mean, at both tables that I sat at, the talk was, really, it's the exposure, starting even from the youngest ages. And it's exposure, and it's about learning about opportunities, seeing people going to work, seeing people, you know, put their head down, work hard, and see the fruits of their labor. So it's kind of eye-opening that to put these into different buckets and to see it's like it may not be any of those, right? It might be the exposure problem that starts when you're in middle school or even in early childcare. And so as I think about that, though, it's in my head I'm trying to disaggregate two things, right? There are solutions that you can do and you can implement in the school system when you still have those young people who are still thinking about what the world has for them. But then there are the young adults that need opportunities right now, and that we can't say, oh, we need to fix the system in the schools. We actually have to do something with them, otherwise they won't be the role models for their kids. And so I think the big thing, especially I know the next session or section of this panel is about solutions. I would encourage us to split those two out, because it's easy, I think, for us to say, yes, we need more exposure and we need more people in the schools and in the communities and the neighborhoods, and I absolutely agree. But there's also this piece of what happens if we don't do anything for the parents that have these young kids, or for the young adults that will soon be parents with these kids. And the set of solutions for that population is completely different. And so I think the next section about solutions will be very exciting and important.
Okay, I interacted very briefly with just one table, and the discussion there was, if you make interventions, what do you then do about corruption in government? Okay, and I think that one of the reasons I pose the question about business leadership is that the issue about corruption in government and inefficiencies in government and so on sometimes becomes such a big elephant in the room that it immobilizes you. You basically say, well, there's this elephant we're facing. There's very little we can do about it, and so we basically do nothing. And I think that what we need to do is we need to begin to engage business and others and say, how do you do this? So one of the issues on the table was the development of micro-enterprises. And to me, the engagement with bigger businesses should be, how do you develop a value chain and a procurement process that actually includes micro-enterprises in that value chain? How do you procure from those micro-enterprises? And those are the sorts of discussions we should be having. And we can do that without government. Okay, if we get traction on some of those initiatives, and those initiatives start working, and we then agree that to take that not from A to B, but from A to E, you need a particular regulatory intervention, and you talk to government about it at that time, and you can demonstrate how the regulatory intervention will give you real traction. It's a very different discussion with government rather than a theoretical one. So I think that we do have to find opportunities where business and other non-governmental sectors can work together to address some of the issues of youth unemployment and engage with government as and when there are real concrete regulatory barriers that actually reflect themselves. Otherwise, we just get into this discussion on what to do with inefficiencies, corruption, and other things in government, and it immobilizes us. So let me stop there for this.
So I jumped around from one table to another, but the recurring theme that I heard here, as well as from the tables, is the importance of education and the role of schools in just making sure that the youth have kind of the right skills as they enter into the workforce, so that the companies that actually employ them want these students in their companies. And they talked a lot about companies coming into these schools, providing mentorship programs, and kind of tutoring them along the way, and not depending on the regular education system. So I kind of posed the question back, but what if the kids are not in the schools? Because we are talking a lot about countries that are very, very poor, and where some students don't even get the opportunity to actually go to a school. So I'll tell you an example about some Syrian refugee camps in Jordan. So we funded a school, we built the school, we funded teachers, books, everything, the whole 9 yards. And what we found, and we developed programs that are going to teach these kids about financial literacy, different skills, so that they can go into the communities. And what we found was that they actually are not coming into these schools. Okay, and the reason that they weren't coming into these schools is because there were more basic needs for them that they actually required, which was just providing food for themselves as well as for their families. So when we look at youth unemployment and where youth unemployment is, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Muslim world, wherever it is, some people are not that privileged to actually have an education, a basic education, so that you can provide them with the mentorship that you want to add on to the basic education. So you have to find some sort of creative solutions as well. And I'll talk a little bit about another creative solution, which is just e-learning in general. Okay, we were talking about how e-learning, or just in general technology coming in, and really even in poor countries, some people are starting to have phones, smartphones, and all of that. So we have a program, a financial literacy program, that we went and taught in schools, but we were trying to go to all of the poor cities and poor communities, and we're in 20 different cities in Saudi Arabia. But what we realized is there's not enough volunteers. It is a very costly proposition, okay? And we said we cannot scale this. And we actually started depending on technology. And what was very interesting is when we transformed our course on financial literacy from a regular classroom course to an e-learning platform, instead of training 2,000, 3,000 students a month, what we found is that you can train 15, 20, 30,000, and these kids are actually adopting technology very, very fast. And it actually provides them with the opportunity to do it at their own time, at their own leisure, instead of actually going to a school to learn new skills. So I just find that e-learning as well is kind of a new thing to look at. And on an e-learning platform, you can provide different mentorship ways, whether it's, there's new ways of communicating today. It doesn't have to be me going to a school and educating and talking about it. People actually can communicate and they actually prefer it than talking one-on-one. Some students are very, very shy, but they don't mind chatting on a platform. So I just urge you to think about creative solutions and what their situations are when you think about the youth today.
That's a perfect segue to really the theme that I kind of heard at all of the tables. And one of the things that you get to do as a diplomat, as a U.S. diplomat, is work in a number of areas: political, economic, training, development. And the big takeaway from all of that, particularly for me, I lived in Sudan for 3 years. I was in Nigeria. I spent a lot of time in the Boko Haram territory that you hear so much about, and other conflict areas, is that you have to meet people where they are. There is no cookie-cutter approach. So when we're talking about these macro issues, you really have to get down to where that individual is today. If you remember at the beginning, I talked about the drivers. What are the drivers for unemployment in the neighborhood, in the block, in the region where you are, where you're living, where you're trying to work? What are the training solutions for that region, for that individual? Just to give you a little bit of an example, when I was ambassador in Congo, there were about 40 different pygmy tribes in Congo, and they were very much isolated and excluded from the rest of the population. Basically a true at-risk rural, tropical, and savanna population in both cases. And we tried to find some way to reach them. We didn't understand why we were putting schools and other programs in the area. The village kids would come, but the pygmy children would not, ethnically pygmy children would not come. And what we found out, what was their biggest fear? What was the biggest fear for their parents and for either the young girl or the young boy? It was food. And so I had a team from a Native American university in Minnesota come out because they faced some of the same issues with Native American communities, and we wanted to find a like-minded community that had some similar issues. And what we found we provided breakfast, lunch, and an evening meal, not only for the child to come, but for the parent. And particularly for the head of household, which tend to be women. The other point on finding people and helping people where they are, particularly using the Africa example, nearly 89% of the Africa population, remember that huge population figure I gave you at the top, including where that youth bulge is, they live in the rural area. Even though you have a lot of rural to urban migration taking place, so then you're having, challenges within the cities. But for right now, you have mostly the rural population earning less than $1 or $1.25 per day. So what are the skill sets that they need? Do they need entrepreneurship training? Maybe so, but in what form? What makes sense for where they are? So it is a combination of all these things. So I heard someone talk about, over here, about leadership skills. You need vocational and leadership skills. But think about as you work with your programs, your corporations, your nonprofit organizations, and I've seen the whole mix with working with corporations and NGOs and foundations overseas in the 7 or 8 countries that I've been posted to, and the mix is quite different. So just think about what brings that individual the most fear. And keep in mind the drivers are enormous worldwide, and they change sometimes from day to day. You can have a famine that wipes out an entire village area, or you can have a conflict like Boko Haram. In the northern state of Borno, where Boko Haram exists today, you have about half of that state, which is the size of Wisconsin and or Georgia, I've cut the numbers, where the villages are devoid of people, which means you have not even informal commerce happening. So you're going to have a food security problem for the people that have moved out of their village areas. So what is the basic need? How do you get them back on their feet? So meet people where they are. And the last thing, and certainly not the least, is really just thinking out of the box and having a dialogue with that community, with that person. And sometimes there are barriers to doing that. Figure out what that diversity issue is for you that can bring you in contact, that can help you reach and or listen. One thing Americans don't do well is really listen. We don't listen well as a nation, and sometimes we don't listen well even within our own families. So listening to what and some of that is nonverbal communication. And I see that I've reached my time, so I'll stop there.
I could sit and listen to all of them talk for the rest of the day, but our time won't allow that. Some really good feedback from what they have heard you all discuss in your table group. Now, what are the action steps? So based on what you have discussed in your table group, what do you feel are the needed actions to the questions that have been posed to you? What can be done? And also I want you to think about or give some comment to what are your commitments for when you leave this session today? Because it all starts with us, and then putting our thoughts and our recommendations into actions. All of the outcome from today's session will be first put in the plenary with the outcomes of other of the other sessions today. So scribes, take good notes. If you have an assistant, take good notes. We want to hear from you. We have about 4.5 minutes left. One thing we want each and every one of you to do is scribe. We want commitments, personal commitments from everyone at the table, as well as action plans for the larger world. All right, so we want to know what your commitments will be going forward. Now you have 4 minutes left.
All right.
If you continue to talk, you'll have to share your personal commitment. The room went silent.
We're going up.
All right. There's been some great discussion and recommendations that have been captured by CoVision
Okay. Sure.
from the solutions and the commitments that you have made at your table. Don't put me on this screen. In just a moment,
You know.
Trey is going to put some of the recommendations on the screen, or the commitments on the screen, but all of the recommendations and commitments are going to go to Operation Hope, and they're going to distribute them to the delegates and to all of us that are on the distribution list, and to the world at large who really has the
don't think it's saying
opportunity
anything
to be
Just sitting
committed
Yeah, I think
to
so.
Enjoying the light.
help solving this problem that's creating this great unrest around the world about global youth unemployment. Before those comments come up on the screen, Carol has something that she wants to share with you.
Yes, just to let you know, can you guys hear me? No, okay. Doesn't sound good at all. Okay, I'm just gonna, oh, good Lord, sorry. Just to note that if you're interested in having a copy of the OECD report that sort of breaks down all of the roots of youth unemployment in advanced and emerging economies and sort of digs down into that, there'll be a bowl right by the back door with USB keys that have that report and some other OECD work on youth unemployment in it. I don't think we have enough for everybody, but if you really want one, take one. I had an intern sit and put on every single one of those little USB keys, so don't let Benedict's work be in vain. Feel free to take a USB key for that OECD information and those stats as you go.
All right?
Moderator, can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I might have missed it at one table. I think I mentioned that I had 3 sectors that I was hoping to hear. There was one that I still haven't heard mentioned. And I guess the other thing, if you're unemployed or facing poverty, what else is missing? Shelter. And housing and shelter go hand in hand with poverty and unemployment. The conditions of housing, the conditions of shelter. Somebody may have mentioned it somewhere, I just didn't hear it, and I wanted to make sure that was definitely out there, because that is one of the other drivers. Because particularly in emerging markets and in poverty areas, housing is a big challenge, or lack of housing, or adequate housing, and electricity.
And the list really goes on.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, panel, for all that you've done and all your contributions today. We really value your input, and it gives us something to think about and to work on as we lead today. Trey, are we going to put anything up on the screen, Shannon? Just a second, okay? And while they're, getting that ramped up, we want to thank all of you for what you've done. And I see a hand in the back of the audience. Come on up. Well, I'll come back to you as well.
Permit me, please, to make a very quick comment. Can you all hear me? Thank you. Like one of the moderators, I actually live in Atlanta, and I walked here to the conference, and I parked about a half a mile away. So I'm on my way to the hotel. I'm wearing my trench coat. I'm wearing my baseball cap. And I'm meeting people with their lanyards, asking for directions on where I can pick up my registration.
Very, very poor community.
And they're treating me like I'm a panhandler. Okay?
So
I respectfully request that as we are here thinking about, and I hear all kinds of marvelous things at my table, as we're thinking about this big picture of what we're dealing with here at this conference, let's please remember that big pictures are made up of millions of little pictures, and each one of those little pictures is a life. Because one of the things we talked about in this is tolerance. And every time we deal with tolerance, we're dealing with an individual life. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right. So all right, so these are some of the ideas or commitments that you all have voiced. Developing partnerships between nonprofits, bridging opportunities from early youth to adult. Train and hire youth who are at risk, advocate parent education programs, devote time and resources to financial literacy and entrepreneurship. Volunteer. That's big. Volunteer for hope. Hold government and business officials accountable. Continue to make meaningful connections in the community. All of us can do that. Reach out to more community groups to offer literacy programs to youth and parents, and addressing the needs of all adult and young women. I think this is a great takeaway, and you all have a blessed day. We're going to dismiss right now, break area, and then we'll all congregate in the General Assembly across the hall.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your moderator.
A case in point. It's a negative survey. It's like 400 training providers.
No, it doesn't help. I feel just as blinded. Hello, how are you?